When I woke up, very confused, she said, "You almost died last night. In fact, no one can believe you were alive."
I went into the games not knowing what was coming.
As humans, we just hate uncertainty.
You just sensed that it was out there.
You have to start somewhere.
We're all programmed to push ourselves even farther.
This is On the X, an IRONCLAD original. Welcome to On the X. I'm Chris Irwin, and today my guest is Tommy Caldwell. Tommy is a world-renowned rock climber who gained international fame in 2015 for his legendary free climb of the Dawn Wall on El Capitan in Yosemite, a 19-day feat considered one of the hardest big wall climbs in the world. Beyond this, his achievements include the first ascent of the Fitz Traverse in Patagonia and pioneering multiple other iconic routes on El Capitan. From surviving a harrowing kidnapping in Kyrgyzstan to overcoming the loss of part of his finger, Tommy has faced extraordinary challenges head-on. His story is an incredible testament to resilience and friendship. So here we go with Tommy Caldwell on the X. You said at the beginning there, you said something about a work week, like going to work at El Cap.
Yeah.
What does that even look like for you? What does a work week entail?
Well, I mean, so historically for the past 25 years, I've been a professional climber, and my main thing is El Capitan. And so I go there and I climb El Cap occasionally. I go up on the wall, and that's part of my work. But I'm kind of like an aging professional climber nowadays. So it's sort of transitioning to being like a mentor to other people. I'm doing a newsletter for Patagonia. I do land conservation work. I produce videos and write articles. It's kind of like this interesting life of being a professional climber exposed me to like a million other professions that I'm now able to sort of transition into, but still 80% of what I do is just going climb. Is me just going climbing.
Yeah. Does it ever get, I don't want to say boring. It's obviously not boring for you, but like going to the same place, El Cap, and I've never been there. So I've only seen pictures. And I'm not a climber. I did a little bit of climbing like when I was in college, and so I know how to put on a harness and how to belay somebody and that stuff, and a little bit of that kind of thing in the military, but nowhere near the level that you do it. Is there still like it just fires you up every single time you go to even a place like El Cap where you've obviously been there a million times?
I mean, I wish I could go there more. For me, it feels like coming home. It's where my heart is. It's where I've spent the most time. And honestly, one of the reasons we moved from Colorado to California is so I could get back there because I haven't been there enough. So no, it doesn't get boring. It's still super exciting. I could spend the rest of my life climbing there, but it's not the only place I climb. Like I climb all over the world.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'm curious too, as a professional climber, is the majority of income as a professional climber, does it come from sponsorships or is it other sources? I'm just curious about that.
It's different for everyone. Historically, when you're younger and you're super strong, it can primarily come from sponsorships. For some people, it comes from like competition winnings a little bit.
Okay. Yep.
But for me nowadays, it's probably like 30% sponsorship, 30% like other hustles like speaking gigs and films and stuff like that I get involved in, and then 30% like completely like hustles that I have completely outside of the climbing world.
Yeah. Speaking of competitions, what's your cut on that? Because I talked to Laird Hamilton, and he's somebody who has traditionally just sort of eschewed the idea of surfing competitions, where it's like it's an art form. It's not something you can compete in. It's like, how do you even do that, really?
Yeah.
So what's your cut on that from a rock climbing standpoint? Because you can view that the same way. Now, I would think rock climbing is a little bit different, where there's like those speed things where people race up to the top where you can objectify it that way. But just curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in climbing, it's been proven, and pretty much every serious climber feels this way, that competitions give you the skills and the movement intelligence and the strength that can then very well be transitioned into all the other forms of climbing. So one of the secrets to my success is I was one of the early ones to actually start as a competition climber when I was young, and then use that to excel on the big walls, and it worked really well. nowadays climbing is in the Olympics. Science behind the training of climbing is so far more advanced than
Mm,
what I experienced when I was young. And now those people that were trained in that way are just starting to like come to Yosemite and like do these, more adventurous forms of rock climbing, and they're doing unbelievable things. So I think it's super exciting. Like there was that transit, like the Laird Hamilton style tension when I was young, but then it just got proven that the indoor training and that kind of really scientific training works so well. Now all the adventure climbers spend like 30% of their time going to the climbing gym.
yeah, yeah. I suppose it is different in that regard, right? Like there's a lot that you can obviously get out of a climbing gym, whereas surfing, I mean, one of those like little mini surf pool things just can't replicate what the ocean can do, right? I mean, it
Yeah.
probably is
Yeah.
different in that regard.
Yeah, but I mean, I think in surfing there is parallels a little bit. Like there's, you know, like windsurfers or kite surfers that then get really good at big wave surfing because they're so used to the speed,
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah. So just kind of winding the clock way back, just like you're talking about your kids, you had a kind of an interesting childhood with where you got started with this, and you talk about how your dad got you involved in doing things that normally a 6 or 7 year old would not be doing. As you kind of reflect back on that now that you have kids, what do you think about that, so far removed from, and by the way, when you were a kid, were you like, man, I'm doing some stuff that is not what my friends are doing? Or was it like, oh yeah, this is just normal that I'm climbing up a 14,000 foot peak as a 7 year old with my dad?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was like 6 and under, it was just normal. It's just what we did. But at
Yeah.
some point, I started to realize that my friends didn't do it, and it was cool for me. I mean, it was really cool to sort of come to this realization that I was out there on the mountains doing these kind of outdoor things that it was special. It was definitely special. And I'm not totally sure when that transition happened where I started to realize that. It really happened when I was 14 and I did a summer where I went to Bolivia for half the summer and then I went to
Yeah.
Europe for the other half with my dad. And at the end of that trip I was like, I was a climber. Most kids my age don't get to do this. This is like amazing and an opportunity I shouldn't squander. Now as an adult, I look back at what I did as a young child and I'm like, my dad was kind of insane. Like he did some things with me that was pretty out there that I don't know if
Yeah.
I would want to do with my kids,
Yeah.
just because of
But
the risk management side of it.
sure, but it certainly made you who you are in a way, right? I mean, like,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I did. And he has the superpower in terms of like building like helping people. Like he's a mountain guide still some, and
mhm,
he's a school teacher, and he, more than anybody I've met, is good at taking people on incredibly like painful adventures and having them come out of it being like, that was like a life experience I'm never going to forget. Like
yeah.
like he's so good at just like making that enthusiasm happen. And yeah, we feel
Did
really
you
lucky
do
to have that in him.
did you do other sports before that growing up? Were you doing
Yeah,
like,
there's a period of time where I think I didn't want to follow in the footsteps of my parents really.
mhm,
And I wanted to try other things because my friends were doing it, and so I tried baseball. I was like a middle school and early high school wrestler. I was a cross country runner, and I pretty quickly realized that anything that involved coordination, I was just terrible at. I'm just not actually a natural athlete in that way. I could do the suffer sports, but it was more fun to go out in the big mountains and do those than it is like, running cross country or
yeah.
wrestling in the gym.
And was there a moment where you were climbing with your dad, or however it progressed from there, where you're like, this is it. This is it for me. This is the thing.
Mm, I think it probably came down to ego in some ways. Like I would go climbing with him because it was fun and we were cruising around and exploring a lot of things, and we would spend our summers together and our vacations together, and it was just like good dad son time, and we had kind of a special bond through climbing that a lot of early teenagers don't have. But I just randomly entered a climbing competition on a summer trip. We were just passing through Snowbird, Utah, I think when I was 16 or 17. And I entered this competition, and it was like one of the most prestigious competitions in the US at the time, maybe the most prestigious competition. And we went there just to watch it, actually. But we realized that I could enter this, like this kind of citizens category. And so I entered the citizens comp the day before the pro comp, and I won the citizens comp. And so then I got to compete in the pro comp, and then I won the pro comp too. So suddenly I was like, oh my God, I'm actually kind of good at this. Like, I had no clue that I could compete on that level before that. So as soon as the ego was there and I was like, this is something that I'm actually good at, then I was like, this is my thing.
And how old were you when that happened?
Like 16 or 17.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So that's really,
and climbing was, you know, now you see little kids doing it all the time. That didn't exist much when I was that age.
Yeah. And how old are you now?
I'm 46.
46. Okay. Got it. So you have kind of a couple years after that, and then you have this, this harrowing experience that you underwent in Kyrgyzstan, which I learned all about. What made you want to go there in the first place? Is that just known as like a climbing mecca? I mean, people wouldn't even know where Kyrgyzstan is on a map, right? or how to spell it, certainly. So
yeah. So I was going to Yosemite and climbing the big walls there, and I got kind of embedded in this community of climbers that are really, you know, there wasn't that many of us, right, that are climbing big walls. And then there's a handful of places around the world that have Yosemite-esque big walls, but they're relatively finite, and a lot of them are in like Arctic regions. Kyrgyzstan was a place that a good friend of mine, actually one of my main mentors in my kind of late teenage years, had been there and had an amazing trip there. And he was like this adventure climber and photographer who kind of went all over the world, like seeking out big granite walls essentially. And he's like, this place is incredible, you should go. And so my girlfriend Beth Rodden at the time, she was a North Face athlete, and North Face was just trying to put together these big expeditions. They had a lot of marketing success putting together big expeditions and sending them to remote places and filming them. And so we had this opportunity to do that, like make a little film, bring back photography. I wasn't a North Face athlete. I was just kind of like the tag along boyfriend, but I, you know, convinced them to let me go and rig ropes for the photographers. And so, yeah, we put together this North Face trip to Kyrgyzstan, and that's essentially how I ended up going.
Yeah. And so, but was there any hint ahead of time, given what happened, that there was like, this was potentially a dangerous place to be? Was that known ahead of time at all?
Yeah. I mean, it was a little bit known. Like climbers had been going there for years, and they had no problems that we knew of. Yeah. When we started putting together the trip, we saw a warning pop up on the U.S. State Department website. It wasn't even a warning. It was like an information sheet that talked about these Japanese geologists that had gotten in some trouble the year before in an adjacent valley. And so as climbers, we're always assessing risk. And, you know, the oldest member of our expedition was like 24 at the time. We didn't have that much experience assessing that type of risk. As a Navy SEAL, you're going to have way more, way more experience with that. As climbers,
different type of risk.
Yeah, as kids, but, as climbers, we're just like these kids, and we're like, well, it doesn't, we're probably not going to encounter anything that's more dangerous than the climbing that we're doing. So yeah. We decided to go. We took some precautions. We went to this dead end valley that we figured nobody would come up there. Like, I think on that information sheet, they were talking about like these rebels moving through these mountain passes, and we're like, well, this is a dead end valley. There's no pass up there. And so we tried to kind of assess the risk in that way. We hired a travel agency to fly us in there. They didn't seem concerned. A Kyrgyz travel agency to fly us in there. They didn't seem concerned. And so we decided to do it. And people, by the way, have been going recently. Like in the past years, I have lots of friends that have gone to the same area. And if anything, the political situation is worse now than it was when we were there. It's just, we got really unlucky.
Yeah, unlucky. I mean, yeah, certainly. I mean, I've been places even on vacation, certainly, that they're like in other parts of the world where, there's risk involved, that something could happen like that, kind of a kidnapping.
So and we didn't really know how to dissect the warnings on like the State Department website. Like for instance, the Olympics was in Australia that year, and they had the same level of warning for the
Yeah,
Olympics.
right.
And I was like, well, I'd go to the Olympics, so it's probably fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're up on the wall, right? When these guys are shooting at you, right?
Yeah, we were about 1,000 feet up in our portaledges. We were trying to put up a new route up this wall called the Yellow Wall, and we'd set up a portaledge camp about 1,000 feet up the wall.
And okay. And at first you were like, I don't know what this is, but figured out that people are shooting at you, and you've got to come down, I guess, right? Are they just waving at you to come
Well,
down?
I mean, yeah, so we are asleep. It's it's like first light, it's twilight,
Okay.
and we hear these bangs, and you're kind of used to like these loud noises happening in big mountain zones because rockfall kind of happens sporadically. So at first we think that, but then there's actually like bullets. There's a roof right above us, and these bullets are like ricocheting off the roof. They're shooting right at us, and so we realize that we're being shot at because you can hear the bullets, and then you can see the dust and stuff, and so we had a long range camera lens with us because we were shooting photos. And so we started looking around with that long range camera lens, and we saw these like armed rebels at the base of the wall waving for us to come down. And you can't move quickly on these walls. They're obviously pretty good shots. Yeah, they had guns that were pretty specific because they were able to aim right between our portal edges and hit this roof above our heads. And so we just knew that they were basically ushering for us to come down.
And what's going through your head when this?
I mean, it was frightening. Like at first we were like, are they trying to hit us? Are we actually going to get shot? We're like on these, these hanging cots. It's like a long chair, a portaledge.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's no protection here. We can't hide behind anything. We're just like, we're totally out in the open. We can't really move at all. Then the guns stopped, and we could see them waving down to us, and we sat there for a while. We're like, should we go down there? Like, what should we do? And yeah, it's very unsettling. I mean, I was 20 years old. I'd never imagined myself in a situation like this. And so the first thing that we had just enough rope, we had 1,000 feet of rope with us that we were able to tie all the ropes together end to end and make it all the way to the ground without taking too much time. And so the oldest member of our expedition, he had like a beard, he smoked cigarettes. He's like, you know what, I'll just go down there and talk to him and offer him some cigarettes. Maybe I can just work it out that way. We didn't know what was going to happen. And we had these radios. We had like some Motorola radios with us. And so John was his name. He went down first. And when he got down there, he was just like, you guys have to come down.
And what could they speak English? Like how are you communicating with?
No, they didn't. Yeah, I mean, you can communicate a fair amount just through hand gestures and yeah, basically that. I mean, it was like, I think it was just all done through like hand gestures and facial expressions and things like that.
Okay. So, not to kind of relive the entire thing, but just, I've watched some interviews with you and watched the Dawn Wall, and like hearing about this experience where you spend, 6 days or so with these captors taking you and you kind of don't know what's going on throughout that whole, did you have a sense of what their plan was with you? Were they just making it up as they went along? Was there a goal?
I mean, we did not totally know what their plan was. Like I think they were kind of making it up as they came along. And, we found out a lot about kind of the political situation afterwards. There's a book written called Over the Edge by Greg Child, and he really researched everything. And a lot of this of my knowledge of what went down comes from that. A few days before we went up on the wall, though, Jason and John, the two other members of our expedition, had tried to get to a phone because we had lost a bag on the way in, and they had hiked like 30 miles or something out to this road and tried to get to a phone. And on that hike, they had come across this small military outpost. And so we knew that existed, and we knew there was a little bit of military activity in the area. Like there was even close to our camp, actually, there was a local villager who was just kind of hired by the military to be the like military presence in the valley. And so, but he was just, he was like a yak herder, just that, that's just how it works over there. And so, I had never been to a country like that. And we're like, oh, this is just how it works. The military just comes around and they get some local people to kind of be their military presence, to keep an eye on things. And then we knew a little bit about these Japanese tourists that had actually gotten kidnapped the year before. And so we're like, this must all be related. Once they took us hostage, though, like, we knew that it was just some sort of military insurgency. Like, they came in, they took us hostage, and then just a few hours after we were taken hostage, Kyrgyz military helicopters were flying around us, and a whole war broke out. And we're like, just turns out we're in the middle of this war unexpectedly, in the middle of the mountains, in a really weird spot. Like, like I said, 30 miles from the nearest road.
Yeah. And they didn't even, you basically ate nothing for the 6 days that you were with them, right? Did they just not have any food? Like, were they?
Yeah. So there was 4 captors at first, and the first thing they did is they took us back to our base camp, because we had a base camp in the valley, and then we were camped up on the wall. They took us back to our base camp, and they had like gorged themselves on our base camp food. They had hiked over a whole valley to get to us, so they were pretty tired and hungry by the time they got to us. And they raided our camp. They'd eaten a ton of our food, and then they told us to pack backpacks for a journey, bring sleeping bags and some food and our passports. And this was all just done through hand gestures. And then we packed up our tents, and we're starting to like hide our tents away when these helicopters started to fly over. And when that happened, we just dropped everything and ran. Like, we just left. We didn't even have the backpacks with us. We just left everything, and they didn't have hardly anything. They had abandoned all their stuff as well. So they didn't have any food. We didn't have any food, and the Kyrgyz military was hunting us. So yeah, that's kind of how it played out.
How did your mindset change over that time? Because you eventually get to this point where you have to push this guy off a cliff, basically, to save yourselves and get rescued eventually.
Yeah, I mean, it went from confusion at first, wondering what was happening, to kind of like this surreal fear. Like, when we were packing up our base camp, they had taken that Kyrgyz military outpost hostage that was in the valley, and he was with us. He was one of the hostages as well, and he had blood on his pants, and he was trying to tell us through hand gestures that basically they had already killed his friends. And so we're hearing this, and we're like, are we hearing him right? Like, did this actually happen? And then when the battle started, we saw them kill him, like shoot him in the head. And we had to sit on his body for like 3 hours as this battle raged around us. So that moment was just like this kind of mind-numbing, surreal fear, like this, something that was so out of anything I had expected that it still doesn't feel real in my mind in a way. When I think back about it, I was like, is that the kind of thing I watched in a movie? I think your body just copes with it in these ways. And then we fled that battle when it got dark, and we went to these 6 days of just surviving. Like, we were terrified, but then we had these moments of finding confidence that we were going to find ways to escape. And Jason, kind of the lead member, the guy who had put together the whole expedition, really believed that we were going to find a way to overcome our captors and actually escape. So he was constantly talking strategy and looking at the guns and figuring out where the safeties were, and talking about picking up rocks and beating them over the head, or getting up, we're in a very steep, cliffy terrain, pushing them off cliff, like all these things. He's just constantly strategizing ways to get out of there. And then each night we would be separated into 2 groups. Like two of the climbers would be hiding in one group, and 2 would be hiding in another group. And that was definitely strategic on the point of our captors, because we couldn't strategize together that way. Yep. And so the whole time we're just surviving. But then I think we also realized in some level that we were more comfortable in the terrain than they were. Like, we were these trained mountain climbers, and we were having to actually help them through the terrain at times. And we're like, this could be an advantage. So yeah. And then for me, like, we got really weak, right? Over 6 days, we got really weak. We got really tired. But then I remember on the 6th night, this survival instinct kicked in or something, and I felt this clarity. I felt this incredible energy. I was like, there's actually a lot left in there, in a place that I never would have known I had if I hadn't been put in that situation. So then you kind of get levels of confidence. And yeah, I mean, over 6 days, kind of everything goes through your mind. The captors themselves weren't hugely mean to us. Like, they weren't able to take care of us, and it was very clear that we had to do what they said, but they weren't yelling at us, they weren't punching us, they weren't pushing us around per se. They were just surviving, and even in some level relying with us. Like, I had managed to shove like 6 energy bars in my pocket, and so we would split that between the rebels and us every night, and they let that happen. They let me
Oh,
keep a
wow.
hold of them. They shared them with us, and in some ways, like, the whole crew of our 4 captors or our 2 captors in the end, like, 2 of them disappeared. So we had 6 of us, like our 2 captors and then the 4 climbers. We were all kind of surviving together, and we had convinced them that we were all on the same team. Like, they didn't think that there was any chance that we were going to try and overcome them by the end. They thought we were just all together.
When you were faced with that decision of having to push this guy off a cliff, how hard was that? Because I feel like this is one of these things where I think anybody that's removed from a situation like that, and they sort of like a what if hypothetical situation, they feel like, oh yeah, I would know exactly what to do. And I just don't think that that's true. I think that's got to go. There's got to be a lot of wrestling that goes on with that.
I mean, I suppose if you're trained for it, maybe you know more, but I mean, it was like I had this moral dilemma, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I knew that to escape, we would have to do something to harm them or kill them, and I didn't like the idea of that. And my girlfriend Beth didn't like the idea of that. Plus, it seemed risky. Like, the whole idea of taking action towards them might go wrong, and they might shoot us or something. And
Yeah.
so it seemed really risky. Jason, on the other hand, didn't seem to have the moral dilemma at all. But the final night when we were climbing up this huge mountainside and we're like above big cliffs the whole time, it's like very obvious that this is our opportunity. He was like, we made this whole plan where Beth and I were kind of like up ahead, finding the route up the mountain, finding the easiest route up the mountain, and we're helping. There's just one remaining capture at this point get up the mountain, and the plan was for us to just find the way, and then they would look for an opportunity. The 2 other climbers would look for an opportunity to push our captor off a cliff, but they couldn't do it. Like, it was just, I don't know exactly what it was. Like, maybe they thought it was too risky, and so we were on the verge of hypothermia at this point. I knew we weren't going to last much longer. So as soon as I overcame the moral dilemma and decided this is functionally what we needed to do to survive, it just happened. Like, it didn't feel like the risk side of it really held me back. So I don't know. I think every personality handles that differently.
Yeah.
But then after I pushed him, I was like, oh my God, what have I just done?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, like watching that video and seeing kind of you talk about that, and obviously this is something that happened at this point 25 years ago or close to that.
Yeah.
But you talk about you and Beth having PTSD essentially after this, and I don't know how long that went on, but what was that like for you, and how does it sit now with you? And were there things that you did to kind of get through that?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I came back from that trip, and my parents and the whole climbing community, they're just like, what has happened to you guys? Like, this,
Yeah.
they didn't know anything like that. Everybody's like treating us with like kitty gloves. They're like, you must
Yeah.
be so traumatized. My girlfriend was pretty traumatized. I was like, I didn't know what to think. I was like, I felt traumatized, I guess. Like, emotionally, it was a lot for sure, but I didn't like hold it in my body. Like, I've done a little bit of research on PTSD since then, and I don't actually think I ever experienced like the physical symptoms. I didn't have
Mm.
nightmares. I didn't like spiral downhill. Like, none of that stuff really happened to me. My girlfriend did, though, for sure. And I feel like the other 2 members of the expedition did as well. And it's interesting. And just in the past few months, I've gotten curious about that again in a way. And I had a friend recommend a book to me, like a psychology book, or like a book called Waking the Tiger, that's all about PTSD. And I
Mm.
read it and had this really interesting case study of these kids that got trapped in a mine.
Oh
They
yeah.
were off a school bus, that whole study, got trapped in
Yeah.
a mine. They did studies on them about PTSD, and the one that didn't really experience it in the same way was the one that kind of orchestrated their escape. And I'm like, maybe I escaped the really detrimental aspects of PTSD because I was in the situation that I was able to like take action in the moment to save us, which kind of purged that from my mind and body. Like now I have
Hmm.
this confidence in my life that when things get really bad, I'm gonna know what to do. I'm gonna be able to react. And that goes a long way towards not experiencing PTSD possibly. This is kind of my hypothesis at this point. And in fact, the book really talks about how trauma can be this incredible force for like awakening in a lot of ways. And I feel like I got that. I feel like I had that. Like my climbing, my my life in general, like I was so much more driven. I had this zest for life after Kyrgyzstan that fueled so much of where I am today. And I feel
Yeah.
kind of lucky in that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had never thought about that as an idea of like if you're the one, I don't know, maybe in control of the situation, so to speak, right? Who sort of takes action, maybe that has some impact on the outcome of that experience. You know, I mean, for someone that's been in the veteran community, obviously for whatever, and in the military for 20 plus years, 25 years, you know, I have kind of my own take on that of like how PTSD comes about, you know, and I think a lot of it has to do with sort of the interpretation we build around whatever may have happened later on in life. And then I think the sort of the emotional processing of it is the other piece, like what you're talking about, like the holding in of the emotional aspect of it, I think is the other thing. So,
Yeah.
but
And another thing worth mentioning is like right after I got out of Kyrgyzstan, I spent about a year just like trying to do the thing that I loved, which was climbing,
mm,
mostly kind of solo. And it did feel like a coping mechanism in a way. But what I ended up doing is just going to El Cap and just spending my time largely alone up on El Cap, working towards these climbing projects in a focused way that I hadn't been able to. Like I didn't talk to friends, I didn't do anything but focus on kind of my craft of rock climbing, and therefore I excelled hugely. Like it was the biggest period of growth in my professional, my professional climbing life that I've ever had because I was just trying to cope, I guess. But it was actually a really like beautiful time in my life. Like I don't remember the coping being this dark place. I remember it being like, oh my God, Kyrgyzstan has given me these tools like this. It reset my ability to suffer. It reset my sense of what actual pain is. Like, all that stuff has been totally reset, and I can use that to my advantage.
yeah. Well, it seems to me like I think purpose is a big thing for people too. Like that what gets you through something is a sense of purpose, whatever that purpose may be. And that's what it sounds like. You have a sense of purpose, right? Like if you're getting out there, you're like, I have something I want to do and keep doing and excel at and everything. That I think that can be a great motivator to just keep going, you know.
Yeah, I mean, when you say purpose, it's interesting in my mind because I'm like, rock climbing, is that purpose? Like, what good
Sure.
does that do for the world? It's like, it's something, yes, it meant something to me. Now that I've been more around military communities and people that are actually, saving lives and trying to do things that are better for the world, and they have this great sense of service, I'm like, that's actual purpose. Like, rock climbing isn't really purpose, but it did mean a lot to me. And so for me, it was maybe like purpose is maybe a word that works sort of, but it was more like an opportunity and like a sense that I could find mastery in something, which is really, really addicting. And then I had these tools to do that.
Yeah, maybe purpose isn't exactly the right word there, although certainly it can be. I mean, you're inspirational to people. So there's purpose in that for sure, right? Like, I mean, I watched that movie and I'm like, wow, like that is certainly if I were a rock climber, that would inspire the shit out of me, I think. You know, so there can be that there. But I think sort of a purpose in the sense of just having something you wake up and want to do every day, having a zeal for something, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And,
so
and, and in some ways, like having a zeal for something that doesn't mean that much, like if you could find zeal in a lot of things, that's kind of a gift. Like I feel like I've always had that. Like
yeah,
I'm able to find that zeal pretty easily, which is
yeah.
which is cool.
Yeah, but I think we can foster it too. I mean, that's something I've kind of tried to discover in my life recently is like not thinking that it has to be like, well, that's something I'm sort of blessed with or just given in life. It's like foster it, you know, like you
Yeah,
can make that decision, I think is really important.
I
It
love
was a
that.
realization for me, certainly later in life. Um, I say later in life, like like I'm still I'm not quite 50 yet, but
Yeah.
um Okay, so you go through this, but then like literally a year later, you end up losing your finger in a table saw, and that's like a whole nother setback for you of something to try to overcome.
Yeah, it almost feels like it was wrapped into the same like moment of adversity in
Yeah,
my life. Like I had these two things that happened to me that really kind of threatened everything that I loved. Um, but it was empowering in a way because I knew that I was like, I might as well try my best to overcome these. And I found power in resetting the expectation. Like nobody around me expected me to do anything really. Like they certainly
yeah.
not excel at climbing, and I kind of didn't expect that. So each day that I would go out and find success and find happiness, and it was almost like this nice surprise, and it really started this flywheel effect where I was like, man, I'm doing better than I thought. I'm like functioning better than I thought. I'm climbing better than I thought, and I might as well just like keep going. And so this like incredible flywheel started spinning, and eventually I just shot way past where I was previous to those to those setbacks.
On the X is proudly presented by Mechanics Wear. Known for their durability and comfort, Mechanics Wear gloves are made from top quality materials offering protection against impacts, cuts, and abrasions. They feature advanced breathability and moisture wicking technology to keep hands cool and dry during any task. Designed with precision, these gloves provide a secure grip and flexibility, helping users work more efficiently and safely. They've certainly been my personal go-to glove for decades. Mechanics Wear gloves are available at most retailers, on mechanicswear.com, and on GSA Advantage. This is one of these things too where I hear this story too much. I feel like is whoever the doctors are like, well, you're never going to climb again type of thing. And I don't know why that is a thing so much. It just it infuriates me sometimes of like why people are given the worst case scenario instead of like, hey man, figure it out, get after it out there,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wonder if sometimes if the doctors have seen enough patients they um that they have found that for the majority of people that works better. And honestly, that worked better for me. Like maybe that was kind of a gift for the doctor to tell me that because I was like, screw that guy, I'm going to prove him wrong.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, you're
Yeah.
right. You're right. It is kind of like a blessing in disguise in that sense. It's just like for some people, I think that you believe whatever you believe, and if you're prone to believing what a professional might tell you about something like that, that's just a dangerous isn't the right word necessarily, but it's like just a thing that, we don't want people like thinking they can't overcome something potentially. Like, why not believe that you can come back from that? What's the worst that's going to happen? Like, better
Yeah.
to believe you can, I think, and try to, rather than right off the bat, just resign yourself to like, nope, there's no overcoming this.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people are afraid of pressure. And so they run from it. And the doctors probably see that a lot. Like if the doctors set their expectation higher than what that person actually believes they're going to be able to accomplish, then it's just detrimental in the long run.
Yeah.
Unless you have like a really good doctor who's also kind of a psychologist who makes the patient believe that they are better than they are in that moment.
Yeah.
I think I didn't believe I was better. I just wanted to be better, and I thought I might as well try.
Yeah. It's funny. This part of your story is probably the place where my history and yours are the closest. My dad ran his fingers through a table saw when I was a kid.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he didn't lose them. He sort of shredded them and they sewed them back up so that he had kind of these weird modeled cuticles around his fingernails and stuff. So you just look at it and be like, that's odd looking, but yeah. So
Yeah, they worked okay. So
they did. Yeah, they did. Luckily he didn't, it wasn't like he was a rock climber or something like that. But so at what point then did you this kind of this dawn wall thing, right? This kind of impossible climb. At what point does that enter your mental space of like, this is something I'm gonna, and I knew nothing about this either, right? Like again, I knew what El Capitan was, but I didn't know about like the different routes and faces and like what makes certain things seem like they can't be done. So at what point does this become a thing where you're like, I think I want to try this, I want to get this, I want to do this?
yeah, so I was climbing all the existing routes on El Capitan, And when you're a climber, you look at a wall and you read it almost like a book. Like you're like, okay, here's these lower angle sections with crack systems that are going to be easy parts of the wall to climb, and then there's these steeper parts with these beautiful cracks that are going to be a little bit harder. And so that's kind of how you go about learning a wall like that, is you're just like reading it and you're figuring out what the challenges are that are going to meet you in that moment. And so I spent about 15 years doing that. And there was always this one side of El Cap that was like so big and so steep and so blank that everybody knew it was never going to be a free climb. Like, it was just, there's just nothing to hold on to over there. But I spent so much time on the wall that I started to believe that maybe there was enough there. Like, I learned that these walls that sometimes look blank from below have these tiny, tiny little edges. And if you train yourself long enough and hard enough, you can start to pull on them. And then if you spend enough time, you can start to like link these moves between them. And I started to look up at this wall as like this humongous puzzle, and just started to wonder, what if something existed? Like finding something in life that everybody thinks can't happen and then becoming the person that might be able to make it happen. That's like a very exciting thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And so the Dawn Wall became that for me. I was like, maybe I could do this. Now there's another side of it too, where the climbs that I was doing for those 15 years were almost coming too easily. Like, I would pick a climb, I would spend a month, working out the sections of it. I would do it, and then the next season or year, I would go on to the next one. And I was like, I discovered this in Kyrgyzstan. Really, I discovered this or I started to believe that our limits, like our human limits, are just like what we understand about ourselves are just wrong. Like, we're capable of so much because we were kind of forced to survive through a lot of gnarliness in a way that I wouldn't have thought we could have survived before Kyrgyzstan. And so with that in my mind, I was like, I want to find a challenge that is really gonna test that, really is gonna show me what I'm humanly capable of. And so those things came together, and I was like, the Dawn Wall is that. Now, I didn't know functionally whether it was going to work for a long time, though. I would go up on the wall, I would swing around on ropes, I would feel all the holds. It was like this massive puzzle that I worked on for years. But eventually I got addicted to that process of working on it. Like, I would go and I would work on it, and I would see this possibility, and I would try really hard, and I would figure out little sections that would work. And I was like, this is probably a climb, but it's too much for me. Like, I don't think I'm ever going to be able to do it. But then Kevin Jorgensen, my partner on it, came along, and he joined me on the project. And so that was another critical element that came together. Like, having a friend there to do it with was the thing, I would say, that made it manageable for 7 years. And we together just became addicted to this process. I mean, we became overwhelmed at times. A lot of times we wondered if it was worth it. Like, we were kind of like giving up on the rest of our lives to try and do this thing that we might never accomplish. But so sometimes we'd give up. Like, we'd end a season and be like, no, man, we can't come back next year. This is just like too much. But then after a few months, we'd be like, we love being up there. It's a beautiful place. Having this like very distinct goal drives us to train. It makes us better people. Like, I came to the place where I was like, even if I never accomplish this thing, just the process of trying to do it is adding something to my life that's totally worth it.
Yeah. Can I ask you just a couple straight up, just kind of climbing questions? One is about both you and Kevin, I think, came from kind of the sport bouldering type of climbing, and then doing this big wall climbing. And you talk about how those are different, other than the obvious of, okay, the first is a smaller thing. It's usually, you don't need ropes. It's whatever, 30 feet, and that aspect of it, versus, okay, I'm going up thousands and thousands of feet. Other than that, is it technically different? Like, what are there techniques that are different about it?
I mean, the thing that's intriguing to me about big wall free climbing, which is what I do, that's not to be confused with free soloing. We use ropes. It's like we're not going to die doing this, hopefully.
Yep.
Is it combines all the elements. Like, you have to have the gymnastic ability of a boulderer or a competition climber, like the finger strength and the timing and the movement intelligence and like all the specifics of like a real high level athlete. But then you also have to have the adventure sense. You have to be able to deal with the bad weather and big falls and the sun and kind of all these elements of just like a rugged environment. Um, and then you have to have sort of like the puzzle making planning aspect. Like there's so many logistical details that have to come together to figure out how to live on a vertical cliff for weeks at a time. So it's sort of all those three elements coming together that make me really fascinated by the activity.
Yeah. When, and then as people develop routes like up El Cap, right? Is the route like super specific where it's like you take this exact route up it? Cause it's not a road or something like that. It's just a sheet of rock. Is it that specific where it's literally like, yep, you go this exact crack, is it down to the kind of gnat's ass, or is there sort of like wiggle room when you look at some of these routes?
That is man, getting into the details. So it kind of depends a little bit on like on El Capitan where there's a lot of climbing, it becomes very specific. Like there could be one route here and then 15 feet left there could be another route, and to do that route you need to follow that exact line. The Dawn Wall is a pretty expansive face. It's 3,000 feet tall and probably about a quarter mile wide, and I was just trying to find the easiest way up that section of El Capitan. And so I didn't have a super specific route in mind. I was like, I just want to find my way up this part of the mountain. Now that I've done the route though, the people that go and try and repeat it do follow basically the exact same path. Like they clip into the same anchor points, they belay in the same places. Yeah, they follow the exact same path. Yeah.
How do you figure that out? This is the part I have no concept of how this is figured out from the ground. Like I can see obviously the first 10 feet or whatever, but how do you then plan the rest of the route up? Do you go up a portion of it, sort it out, come back down? Do you Jumar up it?
Yeah, I mean, historically you spend a lot of time in the valley with like a spotting scope or binoculars, trying to find the features of the rock that you wanted to follow, and you learn how to read that stuff. You could look at things in binoculars and be like, that looks like a crack that I can pound pitons into or put cams into. Usually you're looking for a way that you're going to be able to find natural protection. The Dawn Wall doesn't have a ton of natural protection, so we actually, and all the routes on El Cap do this to a point. The Dawn Wall maybe a little bit more than some. We actually drill bolts into the wall so that you could climb these blank faces that aren't possible to protect with pitons and the other forms of natural protection. But the other thing about the Dawn Wall is it was so hard to map out because there wasn't like these obvious crack systems that you're following. That a lot of what I did is I walked around at the top of El Cap with 3,000 feet of rope, and I rappelled down the mountain and would like swing back and forth and just like feel the individual holds with my fingers. And I'd be like, oh, there's like these little edges over here, and there's this little dihedral up here. And is there enough of these little edges to link from here to there? And these edges are tiny. Like a lot of them are like the size of the edge of a credit card. So a lot of times, even just like looking at it, you don't know whether it's going to work or not. So you have to spend a lot of time actually trying to pull your weight onto the, you're hanging on the rope, you're trying to pull your way onto these little edges and like fiddle with like your ability to actually just like cling onto the side of the wall and then move from one hold to the next. So I spent a year trying to figure out if I could do that, and I eventually did find a path that I thought was going to work, and then I spent the next 6 years trying to make that path become a route.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating. Do you use like drones or anything at this point? Like send it so you get way up top and kind of look at the mountain that way? Is that a technology that you guys have adopted?
I mean, these like drone technology, it's 10 years ago now, wasn't quite there, at least outside of the military. So, but besides that, you're not allowed to do that in national parks. You can't fly drones.
Oh, you're not.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. So even today, when they film these things, you're not allowed to use drones.
Okay, got it. But so like for the stuff that's way up high, 2,000 feet and above, had you already pre-climbed all the way up there to kind of figure that stuff out and then come down?
Yeah, I mean, I walked to the top of the wall first, and I reconned it. I researched it in reverse. Yeah, in reverse. So then so you're hanging on ropes and you rappel, or you have ascenders like Jumar. These ascenders.
Jumars.
You can move up and down the rope, and you can feel the holds. And so by the time we went for our 7-day ascent, like our success, ultimately our successful ascent, we knew it very well. Like it was almost like every move on the majority of the route we had researched the same way you'd research, or we'd rehearsed, I would say, the same way you'd rehearse like a musical routine or something, if you're trying to perfect it. Like we knew it
Sure.
so well that we knew where each little crystal of granite to put each finger on, where like the position that our hips would be in, like the angle that our shoe rubber would touch. We that's what we did for 7 years. We were trying to figure out all those like little micro details.
That's an incredibly long period of time to like prepare for something.
Yeah, and we weren't there in Yosemite all the time. We were there like 3 months a year, and then
Okay.
the rest when the weather was good, and then the rest of the year we'd be training. I mean, that's one thing that I loved about it the most is even when we weren't there, it was always in my mind. I was like, I gotta become better that I can rise to this challenge. So I'd be training all the time. I'd be planning other trips. It formatted my year in a wonderful way because it always had this moment that I was trying to achieve. It's almost like if you're an Olympian, you're always training for the Olympics. I had that year after year after year.
Yeah. You mentioned like the size of a credit card. Is there a limit? Like, I'm just curious about this, right? Like, at what point does something become where you can't hang off of it? Is there like a measurement there at all? Or
I mean, you're out. There's so many variables. Like if you can take 90% of your weight off on like the other three limbs, then sometimes you can just have like a one finger tiny little bump that's like the size of a pinhead that's enough to like,
wow.
like change your balance just enough to get you over to the next hold. It's like it's very specific and fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's just incredible, man. I can't even imagine trying to do some of this stuff where you're like essentially it's like just a flat wall with just that tiny stuff to grip onto for however many hundreds of feet. I just can't even imagine what that must be like.
Yeah.
And are you the other part is the kind of the logistics of just doing the whole thing. So never mind the climbing aspect of it, but the stuff you have to bring with you. So are you packed out like when you go from the ground, are you packed out with 3 weeks of food, or are you like dragging that stuff up as you go? How's that part work?
Yeah, so we approached it a little bit like they do like big Himalayan mountains. We would always go every year and we'd spend like a month or 6 weeks practicing the moves. Like we would have to go back and remember everything and rehearse
Yeah.
everything. And we'd be going up and down the wall on our fixed ropes. We'd climb up the wall, we'd put ropes on the wall, and we'd have these fixed ropes that we could then move up and down. And as we'd go up each time, we'd like bring some gear and we'd make these camps. So that's
Mhm.
why it's like a Himalayan climb. So we had one main camp right in the middle of the wall that was well
Okay.
stocked
Got
when
it.
we left the ground. And most of the hard climbing, like yeah, it's a 3,000 foot wall, but really the hardest climbing came down to about I would say about 1,000 feet. And so our camp was right in the middle of that 1,000 feet. And so each day that we'd go and like climb these sections, at the end of the day, we could go back to our camp and sleep, and we have all our supplies. But you
Yeah.
do have to get pretty good at hauling bags. Like you use pulleys and
Yeah, I would imagine.
yeah, it's like vertical camping. There's a lot of logistics involved in that. And it wasn't just Kevin and I, you got to remember, we made a documentary film. So
Well, so this is what I wanted to ask about. Yeah, it was the filming of this, right?
yeah, totally. And so I was the most well-versed climber there. Our film team were just my friends. It's not like we just had some random filmers with us. These are people that I've been
Yeah.
friends with my entire life. Like not many people can live and especially take good video footage in this kind of environment. And I actually love this was part of the puzzle aspect. Like we had to figure out all sorts of things to get a group of 3 to 7 of us at the most, like to live on a wall for weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And so that just takes a lot of planning and a lot of bravery and a lot of willingness to suffer, and it was a great team. Like I mean, after so many years with just Kevin, you kind of run out of stuff to talk about, and so having your other best friends up there with you making this film project was actually super fun. Like on
Yeah.
our rest days, it was like a dude's camping trip up there for 14 days. Like we were just having a good and we had to wait for the best possible weather conditions, which meant in the shade in the afternoon. So we would have all day in the sun every day to just hang out and chat and make good food, and then we would only climb for maybe 6 hours in the evening each
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, I learned that. Why is that? Because it was saying in the documentary, basically, it's almost better if it's cold or colder for you guys, and sometimes better at night even because of that. Why is that? Is it just the grip on the rock becomes easier?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to when it's hot, your skin is softer, right?
Mm,
Like you have more sweat and
yeah.
more moisture in your hands. Heat just softens your skin, and the rubber on your shoes is the same way. And so the colder it is, the harder those things are. And so you're trying to, I mean, it's so specific with these tiny holds. You have to find that exact right balance. And a big part of that is just the quality of your skin in that moment. And so surprisingly, a lot of climbing is like that. Like climbers are always looking for those optimal temperature conditions to be able to do their hardest climbing. And so for us, that meant in the winter at night, and it took us years to figure that out. Like at first we were trying to climb in the sun, then we realized we had to climb in the shade. Then we realized we needed to push it more into the winter months, but then you get big storms that would roll through. And so there was an element of luck. Like the year that we did it was pretty lucky because we managed to climb all the way until the middle of January in Yosemite. Maybe we got blessed by the effects of global warming in a way. Like when I was a kid, Yosemite was out that time of year. You never could climb in Yosemite in the middle of January. But on that year that of 2014, it was big drought year, so we were able to just keep going through the winter.
Yeah. Um, did you have a sense of how long? Because it took you 19 days when you set out. Did you have a sense of how long it might take you, or what you were shooting for?
I mean, I think we knew that at some point we would reach diminishing returns. Like living on a wall, we have sleeping bags and relatively comfortable portalages, but if you're just not even walking
Yeah.
for 19 days, eventually you're not going to be able to climb your best. So I think we actually went up with 14 days worth of supplies, thinking that that would be how long it would take.
Yep.
But then when Kevin got stuck and started to not be able to make it through the hardest section of the climb, we like called for support a little bit. Like the filmers that were going up and down just brought a little extra food and water so we could extend that longer.
Hey everybody, Chris Irwin here, Communications Director for the Navy SEAL Foundation, the On the X podcast host. So IRONCLAD is our video production company. They are our podcast production company. And they've been with us since before I was even at the foundation, so more than 6 years. They're pretty much in some way plugged in with just about everything we do at the foundation, certainly on the communications side of things. And I honestly don't know what I would do without them. So they are absolutely top shelf in every regard in what they do. They're able to capture things that really look authentic, especially when it comes to some of the operator footage that can be challenging to do. And everything else is just done at such a high level that I don't really have to think about it or worry about it. If you or your organization or your company are looking for video production, if you're looking for post-production, podcast hosting, these guys can do it all. Check them out, ironcladagency.com, highly recommended. You know, I didn't really know this story. I mean, obviously I knew or that you made it, but when it got to that section where it's a traverse and you make it across, and then you kind of, and he's having trouble doing this, and after a few days you're like, okay, I'm gonna keep going. You kind of go around instead of doing this dino move, this like Mission Impossible thing. You go up and around, and you're going up, and he's still trying to make it across, and it gets to the point where you essentially could summit, like you're gonna make it to the top, and you decide, no, I'm gonna go back down, and I'm gonna do whatever it takes to help him get across this, which I thought was such a, I mean, it's heartwarming, obviously, but like, again, go through the decision-making process there. Like, what was your thinking there?
I mean, I had a lot of time to think about it. Like, I think when the climb started, it was, as we talked about, it was all about like finding like mastery, seeing where my limits are. It was a very like personal thing. It was kind of all about like me. Kevin joined the project, and at first I would say that we were just kind of like functionally using each other to explore our own personal limits. It was still kind of a selfish endeavor, it's just about us. But after doing it for all these years together, it really became about like this team, right? Like the two of us. And I really wanted top this out with Kevin. And I think by the end, that was like that team element was more important than success. Like in some ways, I was like, success just means we're not going to be able to come up back next year and work on this anymore. Like, I really love this process, and so at the same time, you still do want to succeed. So there was a lot of there's like a big dilemma in my mind because Kevin was actually offering to abandon
Yeah.
his own attempts and just support me to the top by putting his ascenders on the rope, and he would climb the ropes and I would be the only one actually climbing the rock and free climbing, which would mean I would succeed and he wouldn't. But at some point I was like, I don't even want that. Like, I don't, it's not even worth it for me to top out if you're not with me. So yeah, then I decided to just wait for him and be patient. And plus, it was just a great adventure up there. Like spending another week up there, people were bringing us extra food and water, and I was with my best friends, the filmers. Like, it was fun. It was like this moment in life where I was like, I kind of don't want this to end. Like, when it ends, I'm gonna have to go and deal with real life. This is like this little piece of like utopia up here on the wall where we're working towards this great goal. We're with our friends. It's like sunny in the middle of winter, and then we have our moments where we climb. It was just a great time.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an incredible testament to resilience. That portion of it specifically, where he's trying to get across that traverse and he just is this one spot where he's stretched out like this, trying to reach and keeps like, how many times did he miss that?
Well, I mean, I don't know. He tried the pitch that the film really highlights maybe 15 or 16 times over
Okay.
7 days. The problem was is he had to mostly just wait for his skin to heal
Yeah.
because he
Yeah.
was cutting himself quite badly, and you can't climb it if you got bleeding and cut fingertips. So it was really more an exercise of like patience more than anything else. Um, and one thing that was really interesting about this climb is I've always seen climbing as this pretty solitary sport, like you and
Mhm.
maybe you and your partner up there on the mountain. This climb, because they installed like a 5G AT&T tower like right across the valley from us, we could go on our phones and use social media, and suddenly the New York Times was writing
Yeah.
articles about it and the whole world was following along. And so in a way it felt to Kevin like the world was suddenly it was like we were in a stadium, even though there was nobody right there around us. It's like the whole world was rooting for us, which really I think fueled Kevin in a pretty amazing way. It made me appreciate like more mass sports where you have a stadium of people around you. Made me appreciate that even more. Now there was a downside too. It was also very distracting. Like, in the
Yeah.
part of the movie where I dropped my phone off the wall, that was truly a blessing. Like, I wasn't sitting there chewing on my fingernails watching the news every day. I was just hanging out with my friends. So for me, I still knew that the stadium of people was there cheering us on, but I wasn't so in the details of it that it was detrimental.
Yeah. As somebody who's been doing this for 35 years or more potentially, um, is there a particular aspect of climbing that you think is the thing that drives you? Is it like the whole thing, or is there a specific aspect of it that you really love?
I mean, there's a lot of aspects and it's changed over the years, but right now it's just about the partnership. And the Dawn Wall really showed me that, like, just like going out there with your good friend, working towards a very distinct goal. It's really about the friendship. And that's become kind of like my main thing. There's a new film that just came out recently called The Devil's Climb. It's just, I tried to make it like an environmental film about land protection. And it pitched this whole idea to Nat Geo, and the whole like friendship element was so powerful that they just made a bromance film out of it.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah.
that's probably the thing that drives me the most these days. And now I do it with my kids and my family. It's like, at the end of the day, we can be in the most beautiful places in the world, but we're like social creatures.
Yeah.
And
Totally
so
agree.
that it's all about the people
Yeah.
for me.
Is there another challenge that you're looking for at this point? Like another, Dawn Wall Part 2, whatever that may be out there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not looking for something that's is physically demanding. Well, at least in that way. Like, the Dawn Wall took real gymnastic strength in a way that you kind of need youth on your side. And I was just at the tail end of that. Now, these days I am looking for challenges. They've just taken on a little bit different form. Like last summer, this this Nat Geo film was about me biking from Colorado all the way to Alaska and then trekking into this mountain and climbing this big mountain. And so it was kind of like a different kind of physical endeavor. You know, we were moving for like 14 hours a day, but it wasn't like specific physical performance. It was just the ability to endure more than
Yeah.
anything. And so I'm fascinated in that these days. I'm also really interested in land conservation. So that was really originally a film that was supposed to bring awareness to this area of the world that's getting extracted. And so we're making a film about the old growth trees there. And now I'm doing another project this winter where I'm going to this place called Kochimo in South America, a place that was going to get a big dam built and kind of get destroyed. It's the Yosemite of South America. And the locals and the climbers got together and sort of negotiated with the land developer to sell it to them and into protection. And so the things that overlap, like adventure and climbing and land protection, that's kind of my sweet spot right now.
Yeah. Is there a mental component to your training at all, or has there ever been like a
Oh yeah.
specific mental piece?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think probably any athletic endeavor is like, at least 50% mental.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean,
For
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I think like it's so interesting because nowadays I'm still trying to train all the time and climb as well as I can. And I think I'm at my limit, but every once in a while I meet some young hungry crusher that's just shows me what's possible. And just by seeing that, I can perform way better. And that makes you realize how much of it is mental. Like when you're inspired by somebody and that increases your performance level by like 10% just by watching it, that so much of what we do is mental.
Yeah, for sure. But is there something you do to train it specifically, I guess? Or is it just a
Oh,
realization of like, this is mental, like I have to kind of believe in this, whatever it may be?
I mean, I do some visualization. I do some like meditation and mindfulness work on occasion. I've like dabbled in that stuff. I'm certainly not the expert in it.
Hmm.
Um, I've never worked with a sports psychologist, which at times I've wondered if I should, but I just
Yeah.
never have. Yeah.
Do you ever have doubts or get afraid? Like during that whole ordeal, I'm not talking about the thing in Kyrgyzstan, but obviously that's frightening. I get that. But like climbing itself, is there ever a moment where you're like, this is scary, or I don't think this is going to work. We're not going to make it. Does that creep in your mind at all? Or you
I mean,
just,
yeah, constantly. Like
okay.
yeah, like you're always weighing the risks and both physical, like, am I going to die risks, and like, is this worth it? Is this adding to my life? Have I become too obsessed? Like, yeah, it's a constant battle weighing all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I would say there's doubt. I mean, even on the Dawn Wall, I gave up many times. And then I would wait a few weeks or a month and be like, you know what, I don't want to give up. I really love doing that. And then I'd come back to it, and I'd have people around me like, for the last years, my wife was really one of the main people that kept me doing it because we had kids at that point, and I was like,
Yeah.
can I afford to go to Yosemite for 3 months a year and not be with my family? And she's like, what would that be telling your kids if you gave up on this thing that you were so passionate about? And so
Yeah, for sure.
she encouraged me, and but I doubted it a lot, and if I didn't succeed in the end, maybe I would have made the wrong decision.
Yeah. If you could like travel back in time to your teenage or 20 something self and give that guy advice, what you've learned over the last 30 years or so, what would it be?
mm, I mean, I think I stressed failure a lot more. Like, I think the advice I would give him is like, no matter what decision you make, you can turn it into like a great outcome. Like, I think I was held back by sort of the stress of whether I was going to make the wrong decision when I was young, and I was like, you know what, all the decisions are right as long as you as long as you can find growth in the hardship or in the successes.
Yeah. Great. Love it. I think we'll end it there, man. That was great. I appreciate it. Like I said, I didn't know a ton about your story going into this, and I found it super inspiring. That movie was, it's hard to find online. I don't know why it's so difficult to find, but
Yeah.
it was really incredible. So highly recommend anybody out there who hasn't watched it, if you can find it. The Dawn Wall is just
Yeah.
amazing, and you have a book too, that we
Yeah.
should bring
The
up. Let
Push.
people know about. Yeah.
Yeah, The Push was my book. The Don Wall film is great. You should watch The Devil's Climb, which is a new Nat Geo and Disney Plus film that's out. Yeah, and then I just want to say I got the opportunity to spend like 4 days on the USS Ronald Reagan recently, hanging out with the troops. That was a very cool experience for me.
What was it? Why? Like, what was the opportunity?
There's this sports psychologist named Michael Gervais, who he has this whole kind of organization called Finding Mastery, and he was licensed by the military to come and teach the troops about resilience. So we had clinics with like the fighter pilots and the generals and the nuclear techs and like all these people, and we would get together and we'd talk about resilience. I think they're having morale issues on these big aircraft carriers, as I'm sure you're aware of, and so they're trying to figure out ways to combat that. So he built a little team, and I was like almost like his laboratory of sorts. Like I came with him, and he would kind of tell stories of resilience through the life of me and a few other athletes. Like this MMA fighter Vitor Belfort was there with us.
Sure.
And
yeah,
it was very cool.
That's cool. Had you never done any work with the military, like even climbing instruction? I think you would be able to.
My dad used to teach the Delta Force climbing. Sometimes I would do some of that, and I met some people back then, but I was really young at the time. And then I did some debriefs after Kyrgyzstan with the Department of Defense, and they were really curious about our story, but just like little touch points here and there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm sure they'd love to have you. Like,
that was really fun.
They get into climbing. So, well, thanks, man. I appreciate you spending the time. Like I said, it's really inspirational, and it doesn't matter if you are into climbing or not. I think the stuff about resilience and the stuff about, to your point about friendship and teamwork, I think is so valuable. I got emotional watching it. I'll admit, I was tearing up at parts of that. And it's a great story. It's a really great story. So, thanks for spending the time. Really appreciate it. Let you get back to your family. And thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. Good to see you.
All right. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks for listening to On the X, the official podcast of the Navy SEAL Foundation and an Ironclad original series sponsored by Mechanicswear. You can learn more about the foundation at NavySEALFoundation.org. You can also text the word On the X to 60104 to join our text subscriber list. See you next time.